She thought she had escaped him. 8 months of silence. 8 months of rebuilding a life from nothing. 8 months of convincing herself the nightmare was finally over. Then she saw him standing across the atrium, and the world stopped. His eyes found hers like they always had, like radar, like a weapon with her name carved into it. She ran. He caught her. And in the middle of a crowded Boston shopping center, with hundreds of witnesses who turned their faces away, Graham Ashford put his hand around her arm and reminded her of a truth she had spent 8 months trying to bury alive. You never escape a man like this. You only delay him. But this time, for the first time in her life, someone stepped into the space between her and the monster. A man who looked at Graham Ashford the way a predator looks at something already dead. If you've been waiting for a story about survival, obsession, power, and a war fought in the shadows of one of America's most beautiful cities, this is it. Hit that like button. Drop your city in the comments below. Let me see how far this story travels. Now stay with me, because it starts right here, right now, and it does not slow down. The morning Vivian Hart decided to finally stop flinching at shadows, the shadows came looking for her. It had been a small decision, really, nothing dramatic. She had woken up at 7:45 in her studio apartment on Marlborough Street, made coffee the way she liked it now. Black, no sugar, a habit she had adopted because Graham had always insisted she take cream in 2 spoonfuls. And told herself, standing in the thin November light coming through her kitchen window, that she was going to have a normal Saturday. She was going to shower, get dressed, walk through Boston like a woman who belonged to herself. Maybe buy the winter coat she had been putting off for 3 weeks because spending money on herself still felt like a transgression she hadn't fully earned the right to commit. 8 months. 8 months since she had left Connecticut in the middle of the night with a single bag, $2,000 in cash. She had been hiding in a hollowed-out art book for over a year, and a level of fear so complete and physical that she had driven 4 hours on the highway without once feeling her hands on the steering wheel. 8 months since she had stopped being Mrs. Graham Ashford. 8 months since she had started being Vivian again. It wasn't a clean recovery. She wasn't going to pretend it was. She still slept with the bedroom door locked even though she lived alone. She still scanned parking lots before walking to her car. She still had mornings when she woke up certain she could hear his voice on the other side of the door, that deep, controlled conversational tone he used when he was at his most dangerous, which was so much worse than screaming. But she was getting better, slowly, unevenly, like a bone that had healed slightly wrong and had to be rebroken to set properly. There were still days that felt like the rebreaking. There were more and more days now that felt like something else. She had the job at the Callaway Gallery on Newbury Street, which she genuinely loved in a way that surprised her, because she had spent so long inside a life where everything was curated for Graham's approval that she had nearly forgotten what her own taste actually felt like. She liked contemporary sculpture. She liked the artists who came in nervous and left with checks. She liked her coworker Dara, who talked constantly and never once asked Vivian anything too personal, which was either remarkable perceptiveness or blissful self-absorption, and Vivian didn't particularly care which. She liked being ordinary. She liked it desperately. The Keller Center Mall was not her usual territory. It was the kind of place built for a different tax bracket. 4 stories of marble floors and glass ceilings and stores that didn't put prices on their window displays because if you needed to see the price, you were already in the wrong building. But the coat shop she had her eye on was there, a small boutique on the 3rd level that a woman from the gallery had mentioned, and Vivian had told herself that she was allowed to have one nice thing. She arrived just before noon, when the atrium was full of Saturday shoppers moving in the slow, purposeful patterns of people with money and nowhere urgent to be. The holiday music had started early this year. It was only early November. And it drifted down from the upper floors in a way that felt slightly aggressive, like cheerfulness being administered without consent. Vivian moved through the ground level with her hands in her jacket pockets. She had dressed practically. Dark jeans, ankle boots, a gray wool jacket that was warm enough but starting to lose the argument with the Boston winter. Her dark hair was down, loose around her face. She wore almost no makeup. Graham had liked her made up. Graham had opinions about everything she put on her body, every surface she presented to the world, as though her appearance were a product he had manufactured and retained the rights to. She had cut her hair to her shoulders 2 weeks after arriving in Boston, just to do it. She was approaching the elevator bank on the north end of the atrium when she made the mistake of glancing toward the main entrance. She didn't recognize him immediately. The mind has a self-protective delay, a half-second where it refuses to confirm what the eyes have already understood. She saw a tall man in a charcoal overcoat standing near the fountain at the center of the atrium, flanked by two other men who had the flat, watchful posture of people hired to stand between their employer and the world. Her eyes moved past him, moved back. Graham Ashford was looking directly at her. The atrium was enormous. There were 200 people between them, maybe more. It didn't matter. The distance collapsed like it always did in her nightmares, the geometry of terror compressing everything to the width of a room, to the width of a doorway, to nothing at all. For exactly 3 seconds, Vivian Hart stood completely still. Then her body made the decision before her mind had fully formed it. She turned left, away from the elevator, and walked. Not running. If she ran, it would create a scene, and Graham had always used scenes against her, had always been better at controlling the narrative in public spaces than she was, had always been the one people looked at and saw a distressed, reasonable man trying to manage an irrational wife. She had learned that lesson in a restaurant in Hartford when she had tried to stand up and walk out, and he had followed her into the lobby and spoken quietly and calmly to the maitre d' while she stood trembling by the coat check. And when it was over, the maitre d' had given her a look of patient sympathy, as though she were a child throwing a tantrum. So she didn't run. She walked fast, threading through clusters of shoppers, keeping her shoulders turned slightly inward, navigating by instinct toward the side corridors near the loading entrance where she had seen a sign for street access. Her phone was in her hand. She was pulling up her rideshare app. If she could get to the side entrance, get onto the street, get a car called and moving before he could follow, she heard him say her name, not loudly. That was the thing about Graham. He had never needed to be loud. His voice had a particular carrying quality, a smooth, unhurried projection that cut through background noise the way a blade cuts through water, barely disturbing the surface. Vivienne. She walked faster. The side corridor was 30 feet ahead. A woman pushing a stroller was coming toward her from the right, and Vivienne cut around her, apologizing without stopping, and she was 20 feet from the corridor entrance, and she was thinking about how she would tell this story later, how she would tell Dara or her therapist that she had seen him and she had kept her head, and she had gotten out. His hand closed around her upper arm. He had always been fast. That was something no one who hadn't experienced it would understand. Graham Ashford was 6'2" and built like old money, broad through the shoulders, always impeccably dressed, always groomed to a level that read as trustworthy. He moved with the unhurried confidence of a man accustomed to the world rearranging itself around him. But when he wanted to be fast, he was fast. And now his hand was around her arm and he was steering her sideways toward the service corridor with the practiced ease of someone who had done this before, who had rehearsed the geometry of controlling another person's body in public spaces. "There you are," he said pleasantly, as though he had simply found her after she'd wandered off. "You look thin, Vivian. Are you eating?" "Let go of me." Her voice came out lower than she intended, rough around the edges. "Let go of me right now, Graham. You're making a scene." He said it calmly. He said it the way you'd tell someone their tag was showing. His hand didn't loosen. "Come with me and let's just talk. I just want to talk." "I'm going to scream." "No, you won't." There was nothing cruel in his voice. That was the worst of it. There was only certainty, the quiet certainty of a man who had spent years calibrating exactly how much he could take and what she would and wouldn't do. You're not going to scream because you're embarrassed and because you're not sure anyone will help you, and because deep down you still know that making noise in public has never gone well for you. So come with me. I just want to talk. A woman walked past them with 2 shopping bags. She glanced at Vivienne's face, registered something, and immediately looked away. Vivienne watched her go and felt something in her chest that was so old and so heavy it had its own texture, its own specific gravity, the particular weight of being invisible in plain sight. "I left," Vivienne said. She kept her voice level. She was shaking inside, but she had learned a long time ago to keep that particular earthquake below the surface. "I left. I am not your wife anymore. You have no... You're still my wife legally. The divorce isn't finalized." He steered her another step toward the service door. 8 months, Vivienne. You didn't call. You didn't respond to my attorneys. You just vanished. Do you understand how that looked? Do you understand what that did to me? She almost laughed. She felt it rising in her throat like something broken. What it did to... You owe me a conversation. That's all I'm asking for. I don't owe you anything. His hand tightened fractionally. Not brutally, just precisely enough to remind her of the arithmetic between them, the simple, irrefutable mathematics of his size and her size, his grip and her arm. She felt the first real spike of panic cutting through the trained calm, and she thought, with absolute clarity, he is going to get me through that service door and then I am gone, and no one in this mall will ever be able to explain exactly how it happened. Graham, stop talking, he said, and the pleasantness was gone now, replaced by something flat and terminal. You stop talking, and you come with me and we will have a reasonable conversation, and this will all be over. You've been hiding in this city playing at being a person, and it stops today. Do you understand me? It stops today. She pulled hard against his grip. He didn't even adjust his footing. The service door was 10 feet away. And then someone stepped into the space between the door and Graham Ashford's forward motion, and the world stopped moving. He was not as tall as Graham. He was perhaps an inch shorter, built differently, leaner through the frame, but with a quality of density that had nothing to do with bulk, the kind of presence that certain men develop when they have spent enough years making other men afraid of them. He was wearing a black jacket over a dark sweater, no tie, no armor, no performance of intimidation. He didn't need any of it. His face was sharp-featured and still, with dark eyes that moved once, from Graham's hand on Vivian's arm to Graham's face, and then stopped moving. He stood with his hands loose at his sides. There were two other men flanking him, slightly behind, and they had the particular stillness of people whose job is to be ready rather than present. But Vivian barely registered them. She registered the man in front. "Sir," Graham's voice had shifted. The pleasantness was gone, but so was the flatness. There was something new in it. Not quite fear, not yet, but the early vibration of a man recalibrating. "This is a private matter." The man looked at Graham for a moment without speaking. Then he looked at Vivian. His gaze was direct and entirely without pity, which was strange because pity was what she usually got from strangers in these moments, when they looked at her face and understood something was wrong. He didn't look at her like she was a victim. He looked at her like she was a person. "Are you all right?" he asked her. His voice was quieter than she expected, unhurried. "She's fine," Graham said immediately. "She's my wife, and we're having a... I wasn't talking to you." He said it without looking at Graham. His eyes stayed on Vivian. She became aware that the area around them had shifted. The foot traffic nearby had slowed without stopping. Shoppers recalibrating their routes in that instinctive way, crowds responded to the electric charge that precedes violence. Nobody was leaving. Nobody was getting closer. "No," Vivian said. Her voice came out steadier than she had any right to expect. "I'm not all right. He has my arm, and I want him to let go, and he won't." The man's eyes moved to Graham's hand on her arm, then back to Graham's face. He reached up, unhurried, and pulled his right hand from his jacket pocket. He was wearing 3 gold rings, the kind of rings that were not decorative, that were weight and statement and warning. He looked at them briefly, as though confirming something, and then he began to remove them. He handed them, one by one, to the man on his left without looking away from Graham. The gesture took perhaps 8 seconds total. In those 8 seconds, the 2 security-hired men who had been flanking Graham made a small, quiet retreat. 2 steps back, no more. Just enough to register clearly that they were employees and not loyalists, and that the parameters of their employment had just encountered a boundary they had not been briefed on. Graham's hand did not release her arm immediately. It took another second, which was 1 second too long, but it did release. "I don't know who you think you are," Graham began, and the sentence had started with architecture. It had started like it was going to become a full threat, but it lost its scaffolding somewhere in the middle, and it just sat there, incomplete. "Walk away," the man said. 2 words. No elevation. No threat in the tone itself, just the level, absolute certainty of a man stating a fact of physics. Graham's jaw tightened. Vivian watched it happen, watched the calculation running behind his eyes, watched the precise social arithmetic of a powerful man assessing another powerful man in a public space and arriving, for possibly the first time in his adult life, at a result that did not favor him. "This conversation isn't over," Graham said. He was looking at Vivian when he said it, not the man in front of him, her, because that was who the message was for. Then he straightened his coat, turned, and walked away. His two men followed without making eye contact with anyone. Vivian stood still for a moment. Her arm throbbed where Graham's grip had been. She was aware of her own breathing, shallow, too fast. The hyperventilation she always suppressed because showing physical fear in front of Graham had always cost her something. She looked at the man. He was watching Graham's retreating figure. When she looked at him, he looked back at her. "Do you need a doctor?" he asked. "No." She paused. "No, Thank you. Is he actually your husband?" She felt the word land wrong, the way it always did. "We're separated. Legally, not yet, but yes." He was. The man nodded once, like this was information he was filing away rather than reacting to. "Do you have somewhere safe to go right now?" The question was practical, without sentiment. "I have my apartment." "He doesn't know where it is?" She opened her mouth to say no, and then closed it, because the answer was she didn't know. 8 months ago, she had assumed he didn't know. But Graham Ashford had money and a network of people who did things for money, and 8 months was a long time, and the truth was she had been operating on the hope that she was hidden rather than the certainty. The man was watching her face. Whatever she didn't say, it communicated. "Come with me," he said. She looked at him. "I don't know you." "No," he said. "You don't." It was such a strange answer. It wasn't reassurance, it wasn't charm. It was just a simple acknowledgement of the fact, offered without any attempt to paper over it. "That's not—" She stopped. "That's not a reason to go with you." "No, it's not." He held eye contact with a steadiness that was different from the way Graham had always held eye contact with her. Graham's gaze had always been possessive, measuring, a form of surveillance. This man looked at her like she was the one making the decision, like he had stated his position and the rest was actually hers to determine. "You can also stay here, call someone you trust, and go from there. Your choice." His phone buzzed. He took it out, looked at the screen, and his expression shifted. Not dramatically, just a small tightening around the eyes that suggested the information he was reading was relevant and probably unpleasant. He typed a brief response, pocketed the phone, and looked at her again. "He's not gone," he said simply. "He's moved to the parking structure. He's waiting. That's my read of it. You can disregard it." She stood there in this corridor of the Keller Center Mall on a Saturday afternoon in November, with the ghost of Graham's grip still on her arm, looking at a stranger who had no reason to still be standing here and was still standing here. She thought about her apartment on Marlborough Street. She thought about the lock on her bedroom door that Graham wouldn't know about, but that also wouldn't stop him if he had decided this time to stop applying social pressure and simply escalate. She thought about 8 months of careful, painstaking rebuilding, and she thought about the look on Graham's face when he'd said it stops today. She believed him. She had always believed him when he said things like that. It was one of the few forms of honesty he was capable of. "Okay," she said. The car was black, long, and pulled to the service entrance within 4 minutes. Vivian sat in the back with her bag in her lap and her hands pressed flat against her own thighs, a grounding technique her therapist had taught her for when the anxiety spiked past the manageable line. The man sat on the other side of the seat, a full arm's length between them, looking at his phone. He didn't fill the silence with talk. She appreciated that, despite herself. "I didn't get your name," she said eventually. He glanced up. "Roman." "Roman what?" A brief pause. "Voss." The name didn't mean anything to her. She filed it away. "I'm Vivian." "I know," he said. She felt the small cold drop of that land somewhere between her shoulder blades. "How?" He was quiet for a moment. Not evasively, more as though he was deciding how much of a true answer to give her right now. "Later," he said. "Let's get you somewhere first." She should have pressed. She knew she should have pressed. But the car was warm and Graham was not in it. And she was running on adrenaline and the kind of exhaustion that came from months of sustained low-level terror. And for exactly this moment, she let the answer wait. Outside, Boston moved past the windows in the flat gray light of early November. the old brownstones, the river behind the parkways. The city she had chosen because she hadn't known anyone in it, which had seemed like a flaw at the time, and had turned out to be the only smart thing she'd done. The building Roman Voss owned was not what she had expected, though she couldn't have said precisely what she had expected. It was on the waterfront, an old industrial conversion, the kind that Boston had produced in waves through the 90s and 2000s, all raw concrete and enormous windows and views that made the monthly cost incomprehensible to anyone who wasn't accustomed to thinking in those terms. The lobby had no art on the walls and no concierge desk, just a keypad and a single security camera positioned above the elevator bank, and a man in a charcoal jacket who nodded at Roman with the specific economy of gesture that communicated both familiarity and function. The elevator opened into a penthouse that occupied the full top floor of the building and looked, through its floor-to-ceiling windows, directly south over Boston Harbor. The water was gray-green and choppy in the November wind, and the light on it had the flat, pewter quality of a city preparing for winter. Vivian stood in the middle of the living space and turned slowly. It was sparse in a way that felt deliberate rather than unfinished. A long, dark sofa, a low table, bookshelves on the north wall, heavy and actual. Not decorative, not staged for effect, but a working collection of books that had clearly been read, many of them twice. No personal photographs, nothing on the walls. The kitchen along the east side was clean and hard-edged and industrial, and there was a smell she couldn't identify for a moment before placing it. The cold, salt-sharp smell of the harbor, coming through a crack in one of the windows that had been left deliberately open. Roman had gone to the kitchen. He set a glass of water on the counter and pushed it in her direction. She crossed to it because her mouth was dry, and because it gave her something to do with her hands. "You said you knew my name," she said. He was standing at the counter across from her, watching her with that same flat directness that she couldn't quite parse. It didn't feel like surveillance, and it didn't feel like attraction. It felt more like attention, the specific, undivided kind that she had almost forgotten existed. "Yes. That's not an explanation." "No." He folded his arms. "Do you want the full version or the version that won't take an hour?" "The full version." He looked at her for a moment. Then he said, "There was a charity event, October of last year, the Brennan Foundation Gala at the Whitmore Hotel. You were there with your husband." She remembered it. She remembered it because it had been a bad night. Graham had been in a mood she recognized, the pressurized kind. Too many compliments from other men about the way she looked, too many conversations she'd had without him, and she'd spent most of the dinner calculating how to smooth the evening down to a manageable pressure and failing. And at the end of the night, they'd gone out to one of the upper terraces for air and... She stopped. She looked at Roman Voss across the kitchen counter. "You were there," she said. "I was on the terrace adjacent. I could see you." She set the water glass down very precisely. "The terrace." Graham had waited until they were outside, away from the other guests, and then the conversation had shifted the way conversations with Graham always shifted, from reasonable to airless to something with no oxygen left in it. He had grabbed her arm. He had said things she had cataloged and stored and carried like stones. He had made clear, quietly and with no raised voice, exactly what her standing was in his estimation, and what the cost would be of continuing to behave in the ways she had behaved that evening. She had stood still. She had looked at the harbor lights. She had gotten through it, and apparently Roman Voss had been 20 feet away watching. "Why didn't you—" She stopped. "What?" he asked, carefully. "Nothing." "No, say it." She looked at him. "Why didn't you do something at the gala, if you were there, if you saw?" He was quiet for a moment, the kind of quiet that was a form of honesty. "Because I didn't know what was right to do," he said. "I knew what I wanted to do. Those aren't the same thing." He paused. "And because you hadn't asked." It was such a simple answer. It sat in the air between them, and she couldn't decide if it made her more afraid of him or less. "You've been watching me since then," she said. Not a question. "Not in the way you might mean." "What way is it then?" He was quiet for another moment, choosing the words with the care of a man who had learned that imprecision was expensive. "I made sure you had options when you needed them. The gallery position, the opening was created by someone who owed me. Your lease on Marlborough Street. The previous tenant was relocated at my request. The neighborhood watch arrangement for the block around your building." He stopped. "Not surveillance, structure. Things to make the city safer for you to live in." Vivienne felt the room tilt very slightly. Not metaphorically. Actually, physically, the floor seemed to have shifted a fraction, the way rooms sometimes did when the information inside them was trying to rearrange itself into a new geometry. She gripped the edge of the counter. "You arranged my job," she said. "Yes." "My apartment." "Yes." "For why? You don't know me. You saw me on a terrace at a party for 30 seconds. He looked at her steadily. "I know what I saw. That doesn't—" She felt the first real edge of anger beginning to cut through the shock, which was actually a relief because anger was cleaner than fear. "That doesn't give you the right to arrange my life. Without telling me, without—" "No," he said simply. "It doesn't." The admission stopped her. Then why? He looked at the harbor for a moment, then back at her. "Because I could. And because I was tired of watching people with money and power use it to make other people smaller." A pause. "That's the honest version. It's not a comfortable answer." "No," she agreed. "It really isn't." She stood in the kitchen of Roman Voss's penthouse and tried to hold two realities simultaneously. The reality in which he had violated her autonomy completely, had constructed her freedom without her knowledge like a set designer building a stage, and the reality in which, without what he had constructed, she might not have had a life to live in at all. Both of these things were true. She didn't know what to do with that. "Graham is going to come for me," she said, the practical reality reasserting itself because it needed to. "He said it stops today." He meant it. I know him. He has people and money, and he's not going to walk away from this." "I know," Roman said. "I can't stay here." "That's not what I'm asking." She waited. "I'm giving you options," he said. "Real ones this time, not ones I arranged without your knowledge." Something moved briefly in his face, too fast to identify. "I can get you out of Boston tonight. New identity, resources, a city of your choosing, documentation that will survive scrutiny. You disappear, and Graham Ashford never finds you." She listened. "Or," he continued, "you stay. Not here, or here if you want, it doesn't matter to me. You stay in Boston, and you let me handle Graham." "Handle him how?" The way he said the next sentence was almost offhand, which was somehow more frightening than any performance of menace could have been. The way men like that get handled when someone finally stops looking away. The silence stretched. Vivienne looked at this man who had watched her on a terrace and then quietly, systematically rebuilt the infrastructure of her life without ever introducing himself, and tried to read what was underneath the steadiness. What the steadiness was protecting. What it was costing him to maintain it. "You said you'd give me options," she said. "Real ones." "Yes." "Then tell me who you are first. All of it. Because I just figured out that my job, my apartment, and apparently my neighborhood are parts of a structure you built. And I'm standing in your penthouse, and you haven't been honest with me about the most important part yet." He held her gaze for a long moment. "No," he said, "I haven't." He pushed off the counter and walked to the large south-facing window, the one that looked directly over the harbor, and he stood there with his back to her for just a moment, not avoiding her, just looking at the city, the way people sometimes looked at things when they were assembling the truth into an order they could actually hand to someone. Then he turned around. "My name is Roman Voss," he said. "I run legitimate businesses. Shipping, real estate, logistics. I employ 1,100 people in this city, have 200 more in other states. I pay my taxes." A brief pause. "And I run the most established criminal syndicate in New England. Have for 11 years. Every significant illegal operation in Boston operates either with my permission or not at all." Vivienne didn't say anything. "The legitimate businesses are real," he continued. "They generate real revenue. They're not fronts, they're actual companies. But they exist alongside the other thing. They always have." He folded his arms. "Graham Ashford is a powerful man by the standards of his world. In mine, he's a civilian. He doesn't know that yet. He will." The harbor light moved behind him on the glass. "I'm telling you this," he said, "because you asked me to, and because you deserve to know what kind of man you're deciding whether to trust." A pause. I'm not asking you to trust me. I'm asking you to make an informed decision. Vivian Hart stood in the kitchen of the most dangerous man in Boston and let the information settle into her bones. She had run from a monster. She had run into a different kind of darkness entirely. The difference, and it was a difference she was going to have to decide the weight of, starting right now, was that this darkness had turned on a light and shown her where the edges were. If I stay, she said carefully, and you handle Graham, what does that cost me? He looked at her with an expression that was almost surprised. Almost. Nothing, he said. I don't believe that. Good, he said. You shouldn't believe anything a man tells you for free, but in this case, it's true. He held her gaze. I'm not Graham Ashford. I'm not going to construct a debt and collect on it. You're not currency. She studied his face for a long moment, the sharp, still features, the dark eyes that had been watching her in the mall with that strange quality of attention that had nothing in it of possession. She didn't trust him. She wasn't sure she was going to trust him. But she believed, with the deep muscle certainty of a woman who had spent years learning to read danger in a man's face, that he was telling the truth about this, about tonight, about the cost. Graham has people looking for me, she said. He'll have found my apartment by morning. Yes, Roman said. Probably. So I can't go back tonight. No. She looked around this penthouse, the spare interior, the open window with its cold salt air, the harbor dark and restless on the other side of the glass. I'll sleep here tonight, she said. Tomorrow I'm going to ask you every question I have, and you're going to answer all of them, and then I'm going to decide. Roman Voss looked at her for a moment. Okay, he said. She nodded once, sharply, the way people nodded when they were done negotiating and needed the other party to understand that the negotiation was done and not settled. Then she picked up the glass of water and walked to the long, dark sofa and sat down. She didn't sleep for a long time. Through the floor-to-ceiling glass, the harbor moved under the November sky, and the city pressed its lights against the dark. And somewhere across Boston, in whatever hotel room or city apartment Graham Ashford had retreated to, a man was making plans. She could feel it. She'd always been able to feel it, the way the air changed when Graham decided something. And across the room, Roman Voss sat at the table with his phone and a stack of papers, working in silence, and occasionally glancing up at her with those dark, level eyes that did not calculate or possess or plan, that simply noted, with careful precision, that she was still here, still breathing, still choosing, which she was beginning to understand might be exactly what had started this war in the first place. The message came at 2:47 in the morning. Roman's phone buzzed against the table, and he picked it up without urgency, read the screen, and then was still for a moment. The precise stillness she was beginning to recognize as his version of reaction. She hadn't been asleep. She'd been lying on the sofa with a blanket one of his men had produced, watching the ceiling. What is it? She asked. He looked at her across the dim room. Graham hired people tonight, he said. There are 4 of them. They're already in Boston. A pause. They have your address. The cold moved through her and she sat up. So it's already started, she said. Roman set the phone down and stood up, and there was something in the way he moved, unhurried, entirely without alarm, that was both more frightening and more steadying than anything else could have been. Yes, he said, it's already started. He looked at her. Question is, he said quietly, whether it ends on his terms or ours. The 4 men had names, but Roman didn't use them. He used their designations, numbers, positions, the shorthand of a man who had long ago stopped thinking of opposition as individuals and started thinking of them as problems with specific geometries. He stood at the kitchen counter with his phone and a second device that had appeared from somewhere, a flat, matte gray thing that looked nothing like a consumer product, and he made calls in a voice so low and even that Vivian, from the sofa, could hear the tone but not the words. She sat with the blanket around her shoulders and watched him and tried to take an honest inventory of her own condition, terrified. Yes, that was baseline and had been baseline for 8 months, the low-grade hum of it so constant she sometimes forgot it was there, the way you stopped hearing traffic after long enough in a city. But this was different from the background noise. This was the terror of a situation that was moving, that had momentum, that had graduated from threat to action in the space of a single evening. Exhausted. Yes. The adrenaline of the mall had burned through her reserves, and what was left was the gritty, abrasive tiredness that sat behind the eyes and made clear thinking cost more than usual. And something else. Something she didn't have a clean word for. Watching Roman Voss make his low, even calls in the dark of his kitchen, she felt the odd, uncomfortable thing of being inside the machinery of someone else's power. She had lived inside Graham's power for years. She knew what it felt like from the receiving end, the pressure of it, the airlessness, the way it reorganized all the available options until only the ones he chose for you remained. This felt different. She was still working out how. Roman ended the last call and came to sit across from her, not on the sofa, on the low chair across the table. He set both phones down. "The four men are in a hotel in Somerville," he said. "They're freelance. Graham found them through a private security firm in Connecticut that does this kind of work when the client needs distance from the outcome." Distance from the outcome, she repeated. When something happens and the client's name can't be attached to the instruction. She stared at him. "He wants to hurt me." Roman held her gaze. "I don't know what the specific instruction was. I know the category of work that firm does. I know the profile of the men he hired." A pause. "I'm not going to minimize it." She nodded. She appreciated that more than she could explain, the not minimizing. Graham had spent years minimizing, contextualizing, reframing, until her own perceptions became unreliable instruments. Being told an unpleasant truth directly felt, in a sick way, like a form of respect. "What happens to them?" she asked. "They'll be gone before morning." "Gone how?" "Not dead," he said. "Redirected. There are methods that don't require violence when the problem is men who are only committed to the work because they've been paid for it. We match the payment and reframe the job. They go home." Graham loses his investment and his operational capacity for the next 48 hours, which is enough time to build a different set of walls around you. She pulled the blanket tighter. "And then what? He hires different people." "Yes." "And you redirect them too?" "That becomes expensive for him. And visible. Invisibility is the one thing men like Graham Ashford cannot survive." A brief pause. "His particular power is built on reputation. Social, financial, institutional. He needs to be seen as stable, controlled, legitimate. Every time he reaches for you directly, he creates a trail. I'm going to make sure that trail gets walked by the right people." Vivian was quiet for a moment. "You've thought about this before tonight." He looked at her without flinching from the implication. "Yes." "For how long?" "Long enough." The answer sat between them in the dark, and she let it sit there because pulling on that thread right now, at 3 in the morning with her hand still unsteady, felt like more honesty than her nervous system could currently process. "Try to sleep," he said. "There's a room. You don't have to use it." "I'm not going to sleep." "Then don't." He stood, picked up one of the phones. "I'll be here." He moved back toward the kitchen, and she lay down on the sofa because her body had made that decision independent of her mind, and she stared at the ceiling and listened to the faint harbor sounds, and to the almost inaudible sound of Roman Voss working through the night, and she did not sleep for another 2 hours. Then, against every intention, she did. Morning came in flat and gray through the enormous windows. Vivian woke to the smell of coffee and the specific quality of Boston November light that had no warmth in it whatsoever, just illumination, like a fluorescent bulb over a hospital hallway. She lay still for a moment, performing the half-second of disorientation that came with waking in an unfamiliar space, and then the previous day assembled itself in sequence, and she sat up. Roman was at the kitchen counter. He had changed at some point. Same dark palette, different clothes, and he was reading something on the mat device while a coffee maker finished its cycle. He looked up when she moved. "Coffee," he said. It was not a question. "Yes." She used the bathroom off the main room, and when she came back there was a mug on the counter. Black. No accompaniment. He had paid attention. She stood at the counter and drank it and looked at the harbor in the morning light. The water was calmer today, a deep gunmetal color, and there were container ships moving in the middle distance with that slow, enormous patience of very large things. "The four men?" she asked. Redirected. Checked out of the Somerville Hotel at 5:30. Graham? Still at the Four Seasons on Boylston. He hasn't moved yet. She held the mug in both hands. He'll know they're gone. By mid-morning, probably. He'll make calls. He'll either find a replacement operation or he'll try something more direct. A pause. My instinct is direct. He doesn't seem like a man who responds to failure by waiting. He's not. She stared at the water. He doesn't recalibrate. He escalates. Tell me about him. The request was straightforward. No performance of sympathy around it. She looked at him. He was watching her with that specific quality of attention, the whole room kind, the kind that made you feel like the only thing in his visual field. She had told this story before, to a therapist in a grey office in Cambridge, once, haltingly, to Dara, who had cried and then apologized for crying because it wasn't her pain to cry about. She had told it in fragments, in the safe, curated version that kept the worst pieces in the category of implication rather than statement. She found, standing in this kitchen on this particular morning, that she didn't have the energy for the curated version. He's smart, she said. That's the first thing. He's genuinely smart and he's patient and he understands systems, how they work, how to use them, how to make them serve his interests. He built his company from a regional construction firm into a $50 million commercial development operation in 10 years. He did it by knowing exactly who to cultivate, who to neutralize, and how to make both look effortless. She drank coffee. He married me because I fit the image he needed at that point in his career. She paused, not with emotion, more with the faint irritation of someone pulling a word out of a stuck drawer. I was visible enough. Art background, some social ease, the right kind of presentable. I was also not connected enough to have loyalties that could complicate him. I didn't have a family with reach. I had some friends, but not the kind who would organize around me if something went wrong. Roman said nothing. He listened. It was gradual, she continued. That's the thing they don't tell you in the informational materials about this kind of situation, how completely gradual it is. There's no moment when you look around and say, this is it, this is the line. There are just 1,000 small recalibrations over years, each one individually arguable, each one with a reasonable sounding explanation, until one day you're standing in your kitchen at 6 in the morning calculating whether you're allowed to leave the house without asking permission, and you genuinely can't remember when that calculus became normal. She set the mug down. The physical part was less frequent than people imagine. It was present. I'm not going to claim otherwise, but the physical part was almost secondary to the other thing. The constant management of his perception of you, the maintenance of a version of yourself that kept his temperature stable. That was the full-time job. She looked at her own hands on the counter. You lose yourself in pieces, very small pieces. You don't notice until they're gone. Roman's jaw had tightened fractionally. She noted it. He won't stop, she said. Not because he loves me. I want to be clear on that. Whatever this is, it's not love. It's inventory control. I left, which means something that belonged to him made a unilateral decision, and that is the thing he cannot tolerate. The fact that I've been in Boston for 8 months, functional and intact, is a direct affront to his understanding of the order of things. Roman picked up his coffee. He was quiet for a moment. Is there anyone in Connecticut who would move against you if he asked? Family, lawyers, anyone with enough stake in his operation that they'd treat you as a loose end? The question was so practical it almost made her laugh. His attorney, possibly, a man named Terrence Fell. He's been with Graham for 12 years and he does the kind of legal work where the main qualification is comfort with ambiguity. She paused. And his business partner, Derek Cahill. They've known each other since college. Cahill doesn't like me, and he likes the idea of me having left and being somewhere Graham can't account for even less. Roman filed this away. She could see him doing it. Not writing, not recording, just the steady internal organization of information that some people did naturally. I need to know something, she said. Go ahead. Last night you gave me options. Leave Boston with a new identity, or stay and let you handle it. Yes. The leaving option. Is it still available? He looked at her steadily. Yes. Even now? Even after last night? The resources required are the same either way. The offer doesn't expire because you chose to sleep on my sofa rather than walk out the door. She held his gaze. Why does the offer not expire? What do you get from keeping it open? He was quiet for a moment, the kind of quiet that told her the answer was real, and he was checking it before he said it. The ability to look at myself. It was such an unexpected answer that she just stood there for a second. That's it, she said. That's it. She studied him. He didn't look away, didn't shift, didn't offer her any more architecture around the statement. It just sat there, bare and simple, and she found it more credible than anything with more words on it would have been. I'm staying, she said. Something moved through his expression, very fast, too fast to name. Then it was gone. Okay, he said. By 10 that morning, Roman's people had moved her clothes and necessary items from the Marlborough Street apartment, the job done cleanly and quickly enough that she didn't need to think too hard about what their other capacities might be. Roman had given her the guest room, sparse, white walls, a window looking east over the water. And when she came out, she found two of his men at the table and Roman standing with his back to her, looking at something on the mat device, speaking in a low, flat tone to someone on the phone. She poured herself more coffee and sat at the far end of the table. The man on Roman's left was named Kellen. He was perhaps 30, compact and quiet, with the particular quality of stillness that Vivian had come to associate with people who had trained themselves out of involuntary physical reaction. He had a laptop open and was moving through screens quickly. The other man was older, 50s, heavy through the chest, gray at the temples. He'd been introduced as Price, just Price, and he looked at Vivian with the frank, measuring appraisal of someone deciding how much of a variable she was. She looked back at him with equal steadiness. After a moment, he nodded once. Apparently she'd passed some tests she hadn't been informed she was taking. Roman finished his call, put the phone down, and turned. He looked at her and then at the table. Graham contacted a second firm this morning, Kellen said without looking up from his screen. Chicago-based. He's not going through the Connecticut operation again. Larger budget this time. We're looking at a 6-figure engagement. Vivian set her mug down. He's serious, Price said, and looked at her again, and this time the look was not appraisal but information. He was telling her something she needed to understand. I know he's serious, she said. With respect, Price said, knowing someone is serious and understanding what 6 figures buys in this context are two different things. Then explain the difference. He looked at Roman. Roman gave a faint tilt of his head that said, Go ahead. Connecticut firm, that's low-end work, Price said. Intimidation, surveillance, retrieval, men who are good at controlling a single person in a private space. The Chicago outfit is different. They do operational work, coordinated, planned, executed under time pressure. They've handled extractions in hostile environments. What Graham is commissioning now is not come get my wife. It's a military-grade problem solution package. Vivian was quiet. He's not trying to talk to you anymore, Roman said. He was looking at her directly. He's moved past that. The word retrieval was still sitting in her mind with the cold precision of a clinical term that had been chosen specifically because the alternative terms were worse. Okay, she said, because what else was there? Okay, she said again, more firmly. So what changes? Roman pulled out the chair at the head of the table and sat down. He had the qualities, she noticed, of a man who never moved to fill space, who occupied exactly what he needed and no more, which in practice made him seem larger than men who performed their size loudly. You don't leave this building unescorted, he said, non-negotiable. For how long? Until the Chicago contract is dissolved. And you can do that? Yes. How? The same way the Connecticut problem was dissolved. Money, in the first instance. If that doesn't work, other methods. She held his gaze. What are the other methods? He returned the look evenly. I won't give you details. Not because I'm protecting you from them, but because the details are not something you need to carry. She thought about pushing back on that. Decided, for now, it wasn't the hill she was choosing. And Graham himself? Roman glanced at Kellen. Kellen turned the laptop to face the table. On the screen was a financial document, complicated, dense with figures. And Vivian didn't have the background to parse most of it. But she could see column headers. She could see institution names. Graham Ashford's primary operating company, Ashford Development Group, runs on a revolving line of credit through 3 institutions, Kellen said. The credit line is collateralized against pending projects in Hartford and New Haven. Both projects depend on municipal contracts. He paused. Those contracts are up for renewal in 7 weeks. We have 2 people on the relevant committees, Roman said. Vivian stared at the document. You're going to kill his business. Not kill. Destabilize. Enough that his attention and resources come home, away from Boston, away from you. He paused. It buys time. Then we build the next phase. What's the next phase? Roman was quiet for a moment. The legal exposure, he said. Graham has been careful. He's very good at operating just inside the lines, at making his worst behavior happen in spaces where there's no documentation. But careful men make mistakes when they're under pressure. When his finances start to compress, he'll make decisions he wouldn't make from a stable position. A pause. We're going to be there when he makes them. Vivian sat back. She was looking at Roman Voss, this man who had watched her on a terrace, who had silently restructured the available geography of her life, who was now dispassionately laying out the architecture of Graham's destruction with the tone of someone discussing a logistics problem. And she was trying to locate, precisely, the line between this is someone protecting me, and this is someone who has decided to go to war, and I am the declared reason. She wasn't sure the line existed. The gallery, she said. Roman looked at her. My job, she said. Am I still going in? Something shifted in his face, surprise maybe at the specificity. Not this week. I need to call Dara, my coworker. She'll be already handled. Kellen contacted the gallery this morning. Family emergency, out of state, return date flexible. She stared at him. You did that without asking me. Yes. A pause. I'm sorry, that was the wrong call. I made it quickly. The apology landed in a way she hadn't expected. She'd been ready to be angry, had the anger assembled and prepared, and then he apologized without defense or explanation, and the anger had nowhere useful to go. Don't do that again, she said. I won't. Price made a small sound that might have been amusement and covered it by picking up his coffee. Graham's call came at noon. Not to her. She had changed her number 6 months ago, and he had no access to the new one. It came to Roman. Roman put it on speaker without hesitation, placed the phone on the table, and looked at her with a question in his expression. She nodded. I know who you are. Graham's voice filled the room, and Vivian felt it in her sternum the way she always had, that specific vibration that her nervous system had been conditioned over years to associate with the onset of a bad period. Smooth, controlled, just slightly below room temperature. Roman Voss, Boston's great invisible man. Mr. Ashford, Roman said. He sounded almost bored. Whatever she's told you, I want you to understand she's unstable. She has a history of fabricating narratives. Her therapist in Greenwich, if you spoke to him, I'm not interested in your characterization of your wife, Roman said. She's a troubled woman who left an extremely supportive marriage during a mental health crisis. She needs professional help, and her family needs her home. You don't have family. A brief pause. I beg your pardon? Vivian's parents are both deceased. She has no siblings. She has no family home to return to. Roman looked at the phone on the table. You used the word family. You meant yourself. You should say what you mean. The silence on the line had a texture. I want to speak to her, Graham said. Roman looked at Vivian. She shook her head. She's not available, Roman said. She's a grown woman. She doesn't need you to speak for her. She's exercising her choice not to speak with you. I'm relaying that choice. This is what it looks like. A pause, longer this time. When Graham spoke again, the smoothness was still there, but something had changed in the architecture underneath it. The way a wall sounds different when you knock on a section that has water damage behind the plaster. You should think carefully about your position here, Graham said. Whatever you imagine you're doing, playing some kind of protector role, you should think about what it costs. I have significant relationships in this city. Political, financial, institutional. I've spent 3 years cultivating them specifically because Boston was a market I intended to move into. When I make calls, make your calls, Roman said simply. I'll be here. Another silence. This isn't over, Graham said. No, Roman said. It isn't. He ended the call. The room was quiet. Vivian realized her right hand had been flat on the table, and she had been pressing it down hard, pressing the tremor out of it, the involuntary physical response to Graham's voice that she had never fully been able to train away. She lifted her hand and set it in her lap. Price was watching her, not with pity, with the assessment of a man who was recalculating the variable she represented in this situation. "He's going to accelerate," she said. "Yes," Roman said. "The Chicago firm." "Yes." She looked at Roman. "What does accelerate actually mean, in terms of what I should expect?" He held her gaze. He was going to answer honestly. She could see him deciding to. "It means he's moving from a strategic play to a personal one. The financial attack on his business. He'll read that quickly. He has smart people. He'll understand it's not coincidence. He'll understand the shape of it." A pause. "When a man like Graham realizes the game has moved to a level he can't control with money and relationships, he tends to do one thing." "What's that?" "Make it ugly enough that someone blinks." She nodded. The logic was perfectly familiar. It was exactly how Graham had operated inside their marriage. When the normal mechanics of control started losing their grip, he applied enough raw discomfort that the other party would do anything to make it stop. "I don't blink," Roman said. He said it the way you stated a physical property of a material. Not bravado, just fact. "He doesn't know that yet," she said. "No," Roman said. "He's about to learn it." The message came through at 7 that evening. Not a call. An envelope, physically delivered to the lobby of Roman's building by a courier who had no idea what he was carrying. One of Roman's men brought it upstairs, and Roman opened it at the kitchen counter with Vivian standing 4 feet away. He read it. His face gave almost nothing. Almost. He handed it to her. It was brief. Printed, not handwritten. No signature. "She wasn't the first one you watched. Ask him what happened to the woman in Providence." Vivian read it twice. The words sat on the page with the specific cold weight of a piece of information deployed as a weapon. She looked at Roman. He was very still. "What happened in Providence?" she asked. He looked at her, and there was something in his face for the first time. Not fear, not guilt exactly, but the expression of a man who had been carrying something heavy in a place he thought was hidden and had just discovered it wasn't as hidden as he believed. He said her name, just Vivian, and the way he said it had a quality she had not heard from him yet, a quality that told her the answer to the question was not going to be simple and was not going to. He said her name, just Vivian, and the silence after it had the specific weight of a man standing at the edge of something he had been walking toward for a long time without admitting the direction. She set the paper down on the counter. "Providence?" she said again. Not a question this time. A position. Roman looked at the envelope rather than at her, and that single small deflection told her more than anything he could have said. In the 36 hours she had spent inside this man's orbit, she had learned one reliable thing about him. He held eye contact the way other men held their ground. When he looked away, it cost him something. "There was a woman," he said. The room was very quiet. Kellen had left an hour ago. Price was somewhere in the building, but not in this room. It was just the two of them and the harbor outside going dark in the early November evening, and a piece of paper on the counter with 11 words on it. Her name was Claire Uten, Roman said. She was 29. She worked in the financial district in Providence, mid-level position at an asset management firm. She lived alone. He paused. She was in a situation similar to yours. The man she was with, his name doesn't matter now, operated in legitimate real estate on the surface and had connections to organized distribution networks on the other side. He was not connected to my organization, but he moved in peripheral spaces where my people had visibility. Vivian stood very still. "I became aware of her situation approximately 2 years ago," Roman said, "through the same kind of indirect channel. Someone in my network flagged the circumstances. I made similar arrangements, employment stability, neighborhood security structure, a set of options if she chose to use them." He stopped. "I did not introduce myself. I did not make contact. I operated the same way I operated with you, from a distance, through structure." "What happened to her?" Vivian said. Roman's jaw moved. "The man she was with discovered the security arrangement around her. Not my people specifically. He didn't know the origin. But he recognized that the infrastructure around her life had changed, and he moved before I anticipated the timeline. A pause, and the pause had texture, had the specific density of something being carried a long time. She was killed in her apartment 8 months after I began the arrangement. The harbor light moved on the glass behind him. Vivian heard her own breathing. She heard it very clearly, the way you heard small sounds in a room when the larger sounds had stopped. "You protected her," she said. "The same way you protected me." "Yes." "And she died anyway." "Yes." She took a step back from the counter. Not away from him, just back, just needing the extra foot of space to process the geometry of the information. "Graham sent this," she said, looking at the paper. "Yes. He found out about Providence somehow. He has investigators. He's had them working on me since the mall." Roman's voice was flat, not defensive, carrying the information the way you carried something with sharp edges, carefully, with awareness of what it could do. "He found Claire's name, found the connection, found enough of the shape of what happened. He's using it as a lever." "A lever for what?" "To make you doubt me." He finally looked at her directly. "To make you ask whether what happened to her is what's going to happen to you." The question sat in the air between them. "Is it?" she asked. He held her gaze. "I don't know." It was the worst possible answer. It was also, she understood with the cold, clarifying precision of a woman who had spent years being told comfortable lies, the only honest one available. "You don't know," she repeated. "What happened in Providence happened because I underestimated the speed of his response and overestimated the protection my structure provided. I believed the distance I maintained made the arrangement invisible. I was wrong." His voice didn't change in tone, but something in it shifted. Something underneath the control, some frequency she hadn't heard from him before. "I have not made peace with that. I don't intend to." Vivian looked at him for a long time. She was trying to identify what she felt, and the landscape of it was complicated. There was fear in it, yes, the cold, specific fear of learning that the architect of her supposed safety had a precedent failure with a body count. There was something that might have been anger. There was also, impossibly, something that was almost the opposite of what she expected to feel. A terrible, unwanted clarity. Because Roman Voss was standing in his own kitchen telling her a story that destroyed his credibility as her protector, and he was telling it anyway. Graham would never have done that. Graham would have buried Claire Outen so deep in the architecture of a better story that the name would never have surfaced. "Why are you telling me?" she asked. "Because you asked." "That's not enough of a reason." "Because you deserve the information." A pause. "And because if I let you find out a different way, I become a different kind of man than the one I'm trying to be." She looked at the paper on the counter. 11 words. Ask him what happened to the woman in Providence. Graham had deployed this precisely, she understood. Not in a phone call, not confrontationally, but in a physical note, something she could hold, something that had presence. Because Graham understood the psychology of objects, of evidence, of the thing you could look at when someone was telling you a version of events. She picked up the paper and folded it once and put it in her pocket. Roman watched her do it. "I need some time," she said. "Okay. I'm not leaving. I just need an hour. Don't talk to me for an hour." He nodded once, and she walked to the guest room and closed the door and sat on the edge of the bed in the dark with her hands pressed flat on her thighs and let herself feel the full weight of the situation without managing it. Claire Outen was dead. A woman she had never met, whose situation had apparently rhymed with hers closely enough that the same man had arranged the same invisible scaffolding around her life, and it had not saved her. The man who had not saved her was currently on the other side of a door, and Vivian was choosing, moment by moment, to remain in his building. She sat with that for a long time. The fear was real. The doubt was real. But underneath both of those, she kept returning to one thing. Graham had sent this information as a weapon. He had found it and shaped it and deployed it with the specific intention of making her run, either out of Roman's orbit and back towards some configuration Graham could control, or simply into enough panic and instability that she became easier to collect. She knew how Graham used information. She had watched him do it for years. He did not send you the truth to set you free. He sent you the truth when the truth was the sharpest available instrument. She sat in the dark for 50 minutes. Then she went back out. Roman was where she'd left him, at the kitchen counter, but the mat device was put away and he was just standing with a glass of water, looking at the harbor. He turned when she came in. She stood in the middle of the room. "Claire Houghton," she said. "Was there anyone? Family, friends? Someone who knows what happened to her?" He studied her expression, reading the question behind the question. "A sister. In Warwick. She knows Claire's relationship was dangerous. She doesn't know the full shape of the rest of it." "Does she know your name?" "No." Vivian nodded. "When this is over, when Graham is handled, I want you to make sure she knows. Not everything, but enough." She paused. Claire deserves to have someone in her life understand that she wasn't alone in it, even if the person who was there didn't do enough. Roman was quiet for a moment. "Yes," he said. "Okay." She moved to the counter and poured water and drank it, and felt herself come back to the practical requirements of the present moment. "Graham is escalating," she said. The note was escalation. He's trying to destabilize the situation before the Chicago people move. "Yes, my read as well." "What's the timeline on the Chicago contract?" "Kellen's working on the dissolution. 48 hours, possibly 72. "That's a long window." "Yes." "What do we do inside that window?" Roman looked at her, and there was something in his expression this time that was different from the previous assessments, from the careful information filing and the level attention. Something that was briefly, almost imperceptibly, not professional. "We hold the position," he said. They held it for 19 hours. At 6 the following morning, Kellen walked in without knocking, which told Vivian, before he said a single word, that the information he carried had overridden protocol, and set his laptop on the table with the screen facing Roman. Vivian was in the kitchen. She didn't move. Roman looked at the screen. His face went through a brief, controlled sequence that she was learning to read. The initial reception, the processing, the compression of reaction into the flat, steady exterior. This time, the compression took slightly longer than usual. "When?" he said. 40 minutes ago, Kellen said. "The Chicago contact confirmed cancellation this morning, which we read as the contract being dissolved." It wasn't. Kellen's voice had the particular tightness of someone delivering news they had personally failed to prevent. Graham didn't hire through Chicago. He used Chicago as the visible line item. The actual operational team is local, Boston-based, private, been in place since yesterday morning. The room was very quiet. "How local?" Roman said. Kellen looked at the screen. "The team leader has a prior working relationship with Derek Cahill." Roman was still. "Cahill," Vivian said from the kitchen. Both men looked at her. "Graham's business partner. I told you about him." "Yes," Roman said. He looked at Kellen. "Cahill is Graham's Boston infrastructure. He's been in the city for 6 months," Kellen said, establishing the market relationships Graham claimed to be building. The legitimate business story was cover. Cahill's been building operational capacity, local contacts, venue access, transit routes. A pause. "He knows the city." Vivian set her glass down very carefully. "Graham wasn't improvising when his Connecticut people were redirected," she said. "The understanding assembling itself in real time, the pieces dropping into their correct arrangement with the horrible efficiency of a pattern you should have seen sooner. He already had a secondary operation in place. The Chicago name was a misdirection. While you were working on dissolving that contract, the real team was already positioned," Roman said. The silence had a different quality now. Not the silence of a conversation pausing, but the silence of a situation that had just changed shape entirely. Roman looked at Kellen. "Where are they now?" "That's the problem." Kellen turned the laptop slightly. "We had 3 locations under watch. All 3 went cold in the last 2 hours. They moved." "To where?" Kellen's jaw tightened fractionally. "We don't know." Price came in from the side corridor. He had his jacket on, which meant he'd come from outside. His face had the particular set of someone who had been moving fast and had arrived with information they didn't want to be carrying. He looked at Roman, then at Vivian, then back at Roman. "Tell me," Roman said. "The gallery," Price said. "Callaway Gallery on Newbury. There are 2 men inside. They've been there for 40 minutes. A pause that had weight in it. They have Dara Sims. The name hit Vivian in the chest like a physical thing. Dara, who talked constantly and never asked too many questions, and had cried when Vivian told her the partial version of the story and then apologized for crying. She has nothing to do with this, Vivian said. Her voice came out wrong. Too tight, too high at the edges, the controlled exterior cracking in exactly one place. She doesn't know anything. She's not part of... She's leverage, Price said. Not cruelly, just the fact of it. Roman was already moving, jacket on, phone in hand, the economical rapid sequence of a man switching from containment mode to operational mode with the ease of someone who had done it many times. He stopped when he reached Vivian. Stay here, he said. That's my friend. I know. She's there because of me. Yes, he said it directly without apology or cushion, and I'm going to get her out, but you are not coming. You can't tell me. Graham wants you to move, Roman said. His voice was low and very even. This is designed to make you move. The moment you leave this building, the geometry changes in his favor. He knows you. He knows you'll try to get to her. He held her gaze with that absolute, unbroken steadiness. I need you to trust me for the next 2 hours. Not permanently, not unconditionally, just right now. She looked at him. She thought about the cost of trust. She had the full accounting of what trust had cost her over the years, line by line, the specific invoice of every time she had trusted Graham Ashford and what it had purchased. This was not the same man. She knew that. She believed it, with the same deep muscle certainty she'd used to believe Graham's danger, both instruments of judgment tuned by the same years of damage. 2 hours, she said. 2 hours. If she's hurt, she won't be. He left. Price left with him. Kellen stayed, and he moved to the table and opened his laptop and began working with the focused, head-down concentration of someone managing multiple information streams simultaneously. Vivian stood in the middle of the room. She had her phone in her hand. She could call Dara's number. She knew it was useless, knew the phone was probably being monitored, knew making the call would give Graham confirmation of her emotional investment, which he would use with the same precision he used everything. She knew all of that. She called anyway. 3 rings. A man answered. Not Dara. Ms. Hart. The voice was professional, neutral, the voice of someone doing a contracted job with no particular animus. Mr. Ashford would like to speak with you. She heard Dara in the background, so not screaming, just the particular high-pitched, controlled sound of someone trying very hard not to show how frightened they were. And Vivian recognized it because she had made that sound herself in a dozen different rooms over 5 years. Put her on, Vivian said. Mr. Ashford first. She waited, a transfer sound brief. Vivian? Graham's voice. The room temperature smoothness. I want you to see that this doesn't have to go further than it has. Your friend is fine. She's going to stay fine. All I need is... What do you want? Vivian said. Come home. She said nothing. That's all, he said. You come home, we address the situation with your mental health properly and with appropriate professional support. Your friend goes back to her life, and the very uncomfortable things that have been happening in Boston stop happening. Clean. Simple. And Roman Voss? A pause. Mr. Voss is a businessman who involved himself in a private family matter. If you come home, he has no further reason to be involved. Another pause. He's using you, Vivian. Whatever he's told you about himself, whatever version of rescue he's presented, men like him don't do things without cost. You know that. You're not naive. She was looking at the harbor, the same harbor she had been looking at for 36 hours, the same dark water. I need an hour, she said. You have 30 minutes. She hung up. Kellen was watching her from the table. Roman needs to know, he said carefully. Roman is in the middle of getting my friend out of a gallery, she said. He gets to know when she's out. Kellen's expression moved through something brief and complicated. Then he nodded and looked back at his screen. Vivian stood at the window. The 30 minutes. Graham's metrics had always been precise. He didn't give windows he wasn't prepared to close. She had 30 minutes to make a decision that had been building since a balcony at a charity gala 14 months ago, since a hollowed-out art book with $2,000 in it, Since the first morning she had woken up in Boston and understood, with the giddy, terrifying clarity of a woman standing on new ground, that she was still breathing. Kellen's phone buzzed. He picked it up, listened for 5 seconds, and looked at her. "Dara's out," he said. "She's with Roman's people. She's not hurt." The relief moved through her like a physical thing, like something structural that had been holding tension suddenly releasing. She closed her eyes for exactly 3 seconds. Then she opened them and made the call that she knew, even as she was making it, had only one possible outcome. Graham picked up on the first ring. "I'll come," she said. "Tell me where." The silence on his end had a quality she recognized. The brief pause of a man recalibrating from one scenario to a better one. The small, nearly inaudible frequency of satisfaction. "The Four Seasons," he said. "1 hour. Come alone." She hung up. She turned from the window. Kellen was staring at her with the expression of a man watching someone do something he understood with absolute certainty was going to bring the entire structure of the current situation. Kellen moved fast. He was around the table before Vivian had fully turned from the window, and he put himself between her and the elevator with the physical certainty of a man who had been trained for exactly this kind of intervention. Not aggressive, not threatening, just present, immovable, a wall in a jacket. "You can't go," he said. "Get out of my way. Roman is not here." She looked at him directly. Her voice had a quality she didn't fully recognize in herself. Not calm exactly, but past panic, past the register where fear expressed itself as trembling. She was operating in the cold, clear frequency that existed on the other side of the decision already made. "Dara is out. I'm glad she's out. Now move. He'll be back in 20 minutes. I have 50. Kellen's jaw worked. He was doing the math she was doing. What Roman would say when he returned and found her gone. What Kellen's job description required of him in this specific scenario. What the actual physical and legal parameters of his authority over her were. Which were none. She was not a prisoner. She had never been a prisoner. That had been the difference, from the beginning. "Let me call him," Kellen said. "After I'm in the elevator." He looked at her for a long moment. His expression had the particular quality of a man choosing between two versions of failure. He stepped aside. She was in the elevator before he had his phone to his ears. The November air hit her on the street like a correction. Cold and sharp and real, the kind of cold that made the inside of your nose ache and your eyes water slightly at the corners. She walked fast, not running, her coat pulled tight, and she put 4 blocks between herself and Roman's building before she stopped at the edge of a crosswalk and let herself breathe. She had 50 minutes. Graham's hotel was 12 minutes by car, 8 if traffic was moving. She had time. She did not call a car from her own account. She used cash at a taxi stand on Atlantic Avenue, folding 2 20s into the driver's window without making conversation, and sat in the back with her hands flat on her thighs and the folded note from Graham still in her jacket pocket. Her phone buzzed. Roman's number. She let it ring. It rang again immediately. She picked up. Don't. His voice had a quality she hadn't heard from him before. Not anger. Something rawer than anger. Something with edges. "Vivian, do not walk into that building." "Dara's out," she said. "You got her out." "That doesn't mean—" "I know what it means." She watched the city move past the taxi windows. The old brownstones, the river glimpsed between buildings. Her city. The one she had chosen. "He's not going to hurt me in a public hotel. He's too careful for that. He needs it to look like I came back willingly. You don't know what he has in that room." "I know him better than anyone alive." She paused. "That's not comfort. I understand what it is, but it's the truest thing available." Silence on the line. She could hear him moving, the sound of him in transit, quick footsteps, a door. "I'm 12 minutes behind you," he said. "Don't come in unless I call." "Vivian, that's the condition." She kept her voice even. "You come in and he sees you and everything becomes a different problem. You wait. I call." A pause. "Trust me for the next 2 hours. That's what you said to me." The silence stretched. 2 hours, he said. The word had a cost in it. 2 hours. She ended the call and put the phone in her pocket and did not allow herself to examine the specific fear that was running underneath all of this. The cold, precise knowledge that she was walking back into the gravity field of the man she had spent 8 months escaping. that the atmosphere in that room was going to press on her in ways she could prepare for intellectually and not at all in the body. She had learned something in 8 months. She had learned that surviving was different from enduring. Enduring was passive. It happened to you, through you, because you had no other available verb. Surviving required a decision point, required the moment you looked at the situation and chose your action rather than absorbing his. She had a decision point. She was going to use it. The Four Seasons lobby was everything Graham Ashford's taste had always been. Monumental, expensive, carefully impersonal, the aesthetic of power that needed no individual signature because the institution itself was the statement. Vivian crossed the marble floor without stopping at the desk and took the elevator to the 14th floor and walked the corridor to room 1408 and stood in front of the door for exactly 4 seconds. 4 seconds for her nervous system to process the accumulated weight of every time she had stood in front of a closed door behind which Graham was waiting. Then she knocked. He opened it himself. No security visible, which meant they were nearby but staged, which was exactly how Graham liked it. The appearance of privacy with the architecture of control just out of frame. He was dressed the way he always dressed, the charcoal suit, the precise grooming, the version of himself that he put on every morning like a calibrated instrument. He looked at her face, and she watched him reading it, cataloging it, and she made sure her face gave him nothing he could use. "Come in," he said, stepping back. She came in. The suite was large and spare and looked over Boylston Street, the afternoon traffic moving in the flat November light 14 floors below. A table near the window had papers on it. She clocked them without looking directly, identified the format, legal documents, divorce settlement probably, or something that wore that costume. Graham closed the door. She turned to face him and kept 3 meters between them, her back not to anything, her sight line to the door clear. She had done this without thinking about it, the positioning instinctive, learned. He noticed everything. "You look tired," he said. "Tell me what you want, Graham." "I already told you." He moved to the table, not toward her, and picked up the top document from the stack, unhurried, the performance of a man with all the time in the world. "This is a reconciliation agreement. It's fair. More than fair. You return to Connecticut, we resume the marriage under a structured arrangement with professional support, the asset division remains in place, and the matter of the past 8 months is addressed privately rather than through any proceedings that would be uncomfortable for both of us. You hired men to take me off a street," she said. "I hired men to locate you. The specifics became more complicated than I anticipated." He set the document down. "That's over. This," he gestured at the papers, "is what's available now. And if I say no," he looked at her. The room temperature of his gaze had not changed. "Your position becomes considerably more difficult," he said. "Roman Voss is not a solution to your situation. He's a complication. A man with enemies and a criminal infrastructure that federal agencies have been trying to dismantle for years. When that dismantling happens..." He paused, and the pause was architectural, built to carry weight. "You don't want to be inside that building when it comes down. Are you threatening to contact federal agencies? I'm describing the reality of the man you've chosen to rely on. That's not an answer." He smiled. It was the small, precise smile that she had learned over years was the most dangerous expression in his repertoire. The one that appeared when he believed he had already won and was now simply executing the conclusion. "I've been in contact with agents from the Financial Crimes Unit for the past 10 days. I provided them documentation on Voss's operational structure, his legitimate business filings, his operational cash flows, the discrepancies between declared income and actual asset acquisition." He tilted his head fractionally. "I didn't fabricate anything. I simply organized what exists. The investigation that follows will be his problem to manage, unless I come home. Unless the situation resolves in a way that removes my motivation to continue cooperating with federal inquiries." There it was. She stood in the middle of the suite and felt the full architecture of it settle around her. Graham had not panicked. Graham had not escalated out of control, despite every sign she and Roman had read as escalation. He had been building this. The mercenaries, the Chicago misdirection, Dara at the gallery. All of it was pressure. The same pressure he had always applied, methodical and calibrated. designed to move her from one position to another until the position he needed her in was the only available space. He had filed information with federal investigators. Whatever Roman had done in 11 years of running an empire in the shadows of this city, Graham had packaged it and handed it to people with subpoena power, and he had done it before she had even seen him in the mall, before the intervention, before any of this. She had not been the target of a plan. She had been the trigger of a plan that already existed. She felt the floor shift, the same tilt she had felt in Roman's kitchen, learning about Claire Uten, and she stood inside it and did not let it reach her face. "I need to use the bathroom," she said. Graham's eyes moved. "Vivian, I need a minute, Graham." She let the exhaustion into her voice because it was real, and because letting him see the exhaustion served her right now. It confirmed the picture he wanted, the picture of a woman at the end of her options, turning back toward the available gravity. "Please." He studied her for a moment, then he gestured toward the corridor to the left. She walked into the bathroom and closed the door and turned on the tap and looked at herself in the mirror above the white marble sink. Her face. She looked at her own face for 5 seconds and memorized what it looked like right now, in this moment, standing in Graham Ashford's hotel bathroom with his signature on a reconciliation agreement waiting on the table outside, and federal investigators somewhere in motion against the man who had quietly rebuilt her life. Then she took out her phone. She didn't call Roman. She called a number she had memorized 8 months ago and never used, a number her therapist had written on a card and told her to keep. The number for the Domestic Violence Legal Advocacy Office that operated out of a building on Commonwealth Avenue. The one staffed by attorneys who specialized in exactly this species of trap. A woman answered on the second ring. "My name is Vivian Hart," she said very quietly, the tap still running. "I'm in a hotel room with my estranged husband. He has a reconciliation agreement he's trying to get me to sign, and he's told me he's been cooperating with federal investigators against a third party as leverage." She paused. "I need to know if what he's describing is legal coercion." 3 seconds of silence. "Stay on the line," the woman said. "Don't sign anything. Can you stay on the line?" For a few minutes. "That's enough. Tell me the name of the federal unit he mentioned," she told her. The woman's keyboard was audible. 30 seconds. "Okay," the woman said. "Using the withdrawal of cooperation with a federal investigation as a condition for a private agreement is extortion under Massachusetts statute. If he's made that offer explicitly and you can document it—" "I have a phone that's been on since I entered the room," Vivian said. A pause. "Get out of that room," the woman said. "Right now, if you can. Don't sign anything. The audio is documentation. We can work with that." Vivian turned off the tap. She looked at herself in the mirror one more time. She put the phone in her jacket pocket without ending the call. The mic open, and she opened the bathroom door and walked back into the suite. Graham was standing at the window with his back to her, looking at Boylston Street below. He turned when she came in. "Have you had enough time to think?" he said. "I've had exactly the right amount of time," she said. She crossed the room to the table with the documents. She picked up the reconciliation agreement and looked at it. 3 pages. Dense type. Graham's attorney's letterhead at the top. "I have a question," she said, keeping her voice conversational. "The federal investigators you've been cooperating with, is withdrawing that cooperation something you do as part of this agreement?" He looked at her. Something moved in his expression. The brief recalibration of a man who had just heard a question that was shaped differently from the questions he'd prepared for. "That would be contingent on—" "Is it something you do," she said, "in exchange for me signing this?" He studied her face. She held his gaze without difficulty. She had been holding his gaze for 5 years when it was the most expensive thing she did. Right now, it cost her nothing. "The two situations are related," he said carefully. "Are they contingent on each other? Yes or no?" A pause. "In practical terms, yes." She set the document down. "Okay," she said. She walked to the window and stood beside him and looked at Boylston Street, the same view he'd been looking at, and she felt him turn to look at her profile with the puzzled, controlled attention of a man who could not fully read a situation he expected to be simple. Her phone was in her pocket with the call still open. The attorney on Commonwealth Avenue was listening, and in the street 14 floors below, a black car had pulled to the curb that she had not called, driven by a man who had said 2 hours in a voice with a cost in it and had meant it. "Graham," she said, still looking at the street. "What?" "Look down." He turned to the window. The black car. And Roman Voss on the sidewalk, not moving, not looking up, just standing on Boylston Street with his hands in his jacket pockets and 2 men flanking him at a distance. And there was something in the way he stood, the specific quality of stillness, the complete absence of urgency, that communicated to anyone looking that this was a man who had already decided how this ended and was simply waiting for the sequence to complete. Graham's jaw tightened. "He followed you," he said. "No," Vivian said. "He's waiting. There's nothing he can do from the street." "No," she agreed. "There isn't." She turned from the window to face Graham directly, and she let him see her face now. Not the managed, careful presentation, not the exhausted, cornered woman he had been curating in his head since the mall, but the actual version, the one that had driven 4 hours on a highway at midnight with $2,000 and arrived in Boston and rebuilt something from the wreckage of what he had made of her. "You told federal investigators about Roman's operation," she said. "Vivian, you did that before you even knew he existed, before the mall. You had investigators primed and ready to receive information about whoever I ended up relying on, because you knew—" She paused. "You knew when you came to Boston that I wouldn't come back willingly. You knew because you know me, Graham. You know me better than you've ever admitted, and you know that I am not coming back." His face had gone very still. "This agreement," she said, and picked up the document again and held it so he could see it, "is not a reconciliation. It's a trap with paperwork on it. And what you just told me, using federal cooperation as a bargaining chip, that's not pressure. That's a crime." "You have no idea. I have a recording," she said. The silence was total. Graham Ashford looked at her, and she watched the thing behind his eyes that she had been watching for 5 years. The cold, calibrating machinery of a man who processed every situation as a resource allocation problem, run its sequence and arrive, for the first time in her experience of him, at a result it could not resolve. "You're bluffing," he said. "My phone has been on since I walked in," she said. "The call is to a legal advocacy office on Commonwealth Avenue. They've been listening since you told me the federal cooperation was contingent on my signature." She set the document down. "That's coercion. That's on a record that doesn't belong to you and can't be managed by your attorney." Graham's chest rose once, controlled. "You planned this," he said. "I made a phone call in your bathroom," she said. "That's all it took." Something moved in his face. Something she had not seen there before. Something that did not have the smooth architecture of control. Something raw and structural, like a foundation crack showing above the plaster line. She recognized it because she had felt it in herself. In the early years, the specific sensation of a system you had built very carefully beginning to fail. He moved, not toward her, toward the table, toward his own phone, the quick, purposeful movement of a man reaching for his instruments, his resources, the infrastructure of money and lawyers and cultivated relationships that had been the operational core of his power for 15 years. His hand closed around the phone, and the door of the suite opened. Not broken open, just opened, with a key card, quietly, the way a door opens when the building's security infrastructure has already been rerouted through a different chain of authorization. Roman Voss walked in. He looked at Graham. He looked at Vivian. He took in the room in one sweep. The table, the documents, the phone in Graham's hand, her position near the window, and then he looked at Graham again and stood still. "Put the phone down," he said. Graham's hand tightened on it. "You just broke into a private hotel room. That's—" "The hotel's security director is a man named Walsh," Roman said. "He's worked here for 11 years, and he was in financial difficulty 18 months ago. I resolved that difficulty. He resolved this door." He looked at Graham with the flat, absolute attention of a man who had made all his decisions before entering the room. "Put the phone down." Graham put the phone down. Not because he wanted to, because the mathematics had changed, and he was smart enough to know when the equation had shifted past the point where his variables still produced a favorable outcome. He set the phone on the table with the careful deliberateness of a man performing composure he no longer entirely had. And he straightened his jacket, and he looked at the 2 people standing in his hotel suite. "This doesn't end here," he said. His voice was still smooth, still room temperature. But underneath it, something had cracked, and Vivian could hear it the way you heard the difference between solid ice and ice with water moving beneath it. "No," Roman said, "it doesn't." He reached inside his jacket and set a folder on the table beside the reconciliation agreement. He did not open it. He just set it there. "That's a copy," he said. "The original is with 3 separate parties, an attorney in New York who holds it in escrow, a journalist at the Globe who has agreed to a publication hold pending my instruction, and a partner at the firm that audits Ashford Development Group's primary investor." "Sup what?" He paused. "It documents every financial transaction you've made in the past 4 years that crossed from gray into black. Not allegations, documentation, correspondence, wire records, the specific arrangements you made with 2 city council members in Hartford to secure the Riverside contract." Graham's face had gone the color of old concrete. "That's fabricated," he said. "It's not." Roman looked at him with the patience of a man who does not need the other party to agree with the truth in order for the truth to function. You can spend the next year and a significant amount of your remaining liquid capital trying to argue that it is. Or you can understand what I'm telling you. "What are you telling me?" "That this is over," Roman said, "not because you decide it is, because the mechanisms are already in place, and all that remains is whether you want the sequence to play out immediately or in a more controlled fashion." A pause. "Sign the divorce. In full. Vivian's terms. Whatever she decides she wants." He looked at Graham without any particular emotion. "And call off your federal cooperation. Today." "And if I don't?" Roman looked at him. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. Graham Ashford stood in his Four Seasons suite with a folder of documentation on one side of him and a recording on the other, and a woman he had spent 5 years diminishing standing at his window, and he understood, with the total clarity that only arrives when all the exits have closed simultaneously. Graham Ashford understood before Roman finished the sentence. That was the thing about genuinely intelligent men in the moment of their own defeat. They didn't need the full argument. They saw the shape of it early, the way a chess player sees the endgame 6 moves out, and what followed was not comprehension, but the private, costly process of accepting what comprehension had already delivered. He stood in his suite with the folder on the table and the recording already made, and Roman Voss 3 feet away, and he looked at Vivian, not with the cold measurement she had learned to brace against over years, not with the room temperature control, but with something she had never seen from him before. Recognition, not of her strength, not of his defeat, but of the specific, irrevocable fact that the version of her he had constructed and maintained and operated from for 5 years no longer existed, and the version standing in his hotel room was someone he had not accounted for and could not recalibrate around. It lasted perhaps 2 seconds. Then he looked away. "I want my attorney present before I sign anything," he said. "Call him," Roman said. Graham picked up his phone. His movements were still precise, still controlled. The performance of a man who would not surrender the appearance of order even when the order was gone. He made the call in a low voice, turned slightly away, and Vivian stood at the window and looked at Boylston Street below, and breathed. The black car was still at the curb. One of Roman's men on the sidewalk, hands loose at his sides, the patient posture of people accustomed to waiting. She was shaking. She became aware of it gradually. Not visible trembling, just the deep internal frequency of a system running on its last reserves. The physiological accounting that came after sustained adrenaline. Her legs felt wrong. Her hands, pressed against her own thighs, had a slight vibration in them that she locked down through muscle tension alone. She did not sit down. She did not let Graham see the shaking. Roman had moved to the far side of the room, near the door, and he was looking at his phone with the focused downward attention of someone receiving and processing information. He was giving her space, she understood, deliberate, calibrated space. The distance of a man who understood that this moment belonged to her, and that his presence in the center of it would diminish it. She appreciated that more than she would ever tell him. Terrence Fell, Graham's attorney, arrived 41 minutes later. He was a small, compact man in his late 50s with the specific grooming of someone who had spent decades in rooms where appearance was leverage, and he came through the door already reading the situation, his eyes moving from Graham to Roman to Vivian to the folder on the table to the reconciliation agreement, assembling the picture with the professional speed of a man paid to think fast. He took Graham to the far side of the suite, near the bedroom corridor, and they spoke in low voices for 8 minutes. Vivian did not try to hear it. She sat down finally in the chair near the window, and she put her feet flat on the floor and her hands flat on her thighs, and she did the breathing exercise her therapist had taught her, the one she had used 100 times in 100 difficult moments, and she let herself be a body in a room for a few minutes instead of a position in a strategy. Roman came and sat in the chair across from her. Not close, just present. "You okay?" he said quietly. "Define okay." "Upright, breathing, still here." "Then yes." He looked at her with that particular quality of attention that she had stopped finding unsettling and had started finding, at some point in the past 48 hours, simply true. Like weather, like the harbor, a thing that existed without apology. Fell came back across the room. Graham was behind him. "My client will sign the dissolution agreement," Fell said, and the professional flatness of it could not entirely cover the faint strain underneath, the attorney's version of the same recognition Graham had shown, that the situation had passed the point where his skill set was the relevant variable. Vivian's terms, as presented by her representation. "She doesn't have representation here," Roman said. "She'll need it," Fell said. "We won't execute in this room today. We'll schedule through proper channels, 30 days, both parties represented." Roman looked at Vivian. She looked at Fell. "The federal cooperation withdrawal happens today," she said. "Not in 30 days. Fell's expression moved. "That's a separate—" "It's not separate," she said. "Your client made it contingent. His word on a recording that has already been transmitted to 3 locations. The withdrawal happens today, documented, or the recording goes to the U.S. Attorney's Office this afternoon with a full written account of this conversation." Fell looked at Graham. Graham's jaw was a hard line. "Today?" he said. His voice was still level. She would give him that. The performance never fully collapsed. But it was performance now in a way it hadn't been before, and they both knew it. "I'll contact the relevant agent today." "In writing," Roman said. "Documented withdrawal. Kellen will need a copy." Fell made a sound that was almost professional offense, and not quite. "Fine," Graham said. The word sat in the room. Such a small word. Such a specific defeat compressed into 4 letters and a period. They were in the elevator before Vivian fully exhaled. Roman stood beside her and did not say anything, and the elevator descended in silence, and she watched the numbers drop, 14, 13, 12, and felt the floors between her and Graham Ashford accumulating like something solid, like distance that was also time, that was also a future she had not yet learned the shape of. The lobby, the cold air, the black car at the curb. She stopped on the sidewalk. The November light was flat and gray and entirely without drama. Boylston Street moved around her with its ordinary commerce. A woman walking a dog, a delivery truck idling at the corner, 2 men in suits coming out of the building next door talking about something with spreadsheet energy. The city, indifferent and continuous, doing what cities did. She turned her face up to the sky for a moment. Just one moment. Just the flat gray November sky and the cold air and the specific sensation of being outside a room she had walked into willingly and walked out of intact. "Come on," Roman said quietly beside her. She lowered her face and got in the car. The days that followed had a texture she hadn't expected. She had imagined, on the days when she'd allowed herself to imagine it at all, the careful, rationed daydreaming of a person who had learned not to invest too much in futures, that the end of Graham's threat would feel like a door opening, like expansion, like light coming into a previously dark room. It didn't feel like that. It felt like the morning after a storm. The storm was over. The damage was real and visible. The cleanup was going to take a long time, and the body, which had been running on emergency chemistry for longer than it could properly sustain, was presenting its bill. She slept for 14 hours the first night. She woke with a headache that sat behind her eyes like something structural and drank coffee at Roman's kitchen counter in the early morning while the harbor went through its gray to pewter progression outside the glass. And she did not speak for a long time. Roman left her alone with it. He was good at that. Better than most people she had known, who confused solitude with abandonment and filled silence with the noise of their own discomfort. On the third morning, she called Dara. Dara answered on the first ring and cried for approximately 90 seconds and then said, with the abrupt practicality of someone who had processed the emotional peak and was moving to logistics, "Are you safe?" Yes. Are you actually safe, or are you telling me you're safe? Actually safe. Where are you? I'll explain. Not on the phone. Vivian. A pause. The men at the gallery. One of them showed me a photograph of you. He kept asking where you'd gone, whether you'd contacted me, what I knew. Another pause. I didn't tell them anything. I want you to know that. The weight of it moved through her. The specific, heavy warmth of someone having chosen loyalty at a real cost. I know, she said. Thank you. Don't thank me. Just come have coffee. I need to see your actual face. Soon, Vivian said. I promise. She hung up and sat with the phone in her hand and looked at the harbor. Roman came in from the side corridor with a folder. Always a folder. She was beginning to understand that his life moved in physical documents, in the tangible paper trail of a man who trusted nothing that could not be verified, and set it on the counter. Bell transmitted the withdrawal documentation this morning, he said. Kellen confirmed receipt. It's formal. He paused. The federal inquiry is closed. She nodded. Graham left Boston last night, back to Hartford. She nodded again. The divorce proceedings will move through standard channels. You need an attorney. I'll find my own attorney, she said. He stopped. I appreciate it, she said, but I need this part to be mine. A moment, then, okay. She looked at him. He was standing at the counter with the folder and the flat November light on his face and the harbor behind him, and she thought about the specific, strange journey of the past 4 days. The mall, the penthouse, the suite at the Four Seasons, the elevator counting down floors. And she tried to identify what she actually felt about the man in front of her. It was not simple. It was not going to be simple. I need to ask you something, she said. Go ahead. The arrangement you built around my life, the job, the apartment, the security structure. She held his gaze. Was any of it real? Or was it all architecture? Something you built because you needed it built? He was quiet for a moment, doing the thing she'd come to recognize as his version of honesty, the deliberate assembly of a true answer rather than an available one. The gallery position was created, he said. The mechanism was arranged. But the job was real. The gallery needed someone. You were qualified. The qualification wasn't invented. A pause. The apartment was genuinely available. The previous tenant relocated willingly for financial consideration. You weren't placed in a staged environment, but you chose it for me. I made it available. You chose it. She considered that distinction. Is that a meaningful difference? I think it is, he said. I could be wrong. She looked at the harbor for a moment. In Providence, she said. Claire Houghton. You said the man who killed her was connected to your peripheral operational spaces. Yes. What happened to him? The silence that followed was not long, but it was complete. The silence of a man deciding how much of a truth the situation actually required. He's not operational anymore, Roman said. That's not an answer. No, he said. It isn't. She looked at him directly. Did you? No. His voice was flat and certain. I didn't. He made decisions that put him in the path of people who had their own accounting with him. I didn't interfere with that accounting. He paused. I'm not going to pretend I was sorry about the outcome. She sat with that. I'm going to contact Claire's sister, she said. Myself, not through you. I'm going to find her, and I'm going to tell her, not everything, but what she needs to know, that Claire wasn't invisible, that someone was trying to help her. She paused. I want to do that. Roman looked at her. Yes, he said. Good. It was such a simple response. Just good. No performance of emotion around it, no attempt to make the gesture about himself. Just the direct acknowledgement of a right thing being done. She thought, not for the first time, about how completely different it was to be seen by a person who had no interest in managing your perception of them. 2 weeks passed. She moved back to the Marlborough Street apartment, which Roman's people had secured. Physical security upgrades, a second deadbolt, a connection to a monitoring service. And she slept there alone for the first time since the mall and found that it was difficult for 3 nights. And then, on the 4th night, it was just sleep. She went back to the gallery. Dara was there when she came in. behind the front desk with a coffee, and she looked up when the door opened and they stood looking at each other across the gallery floor for a moment, and then Dara walked around the desk and hugged her without saying anything, which was so unlike Dara's usual mode that it said more than any words she could have chosen. "You look terrible," Dara said, pulling back. "Thank you. I mean it as a compliment. You look like someone who went through something real and came out the other side. It's different from looking fine." Vivian laughed. It surprised her, the realness of it, the involuntary quality, the way it came out before she'd approved it. She had not laughed in a long time. "Come on," Dara said. "The Callahan sculpture arrived yesterday, and I have no idea where to put it, and I desperately need your opinion." She followed Dara into the back of the gallery and looked at the sculpture, a large, angular bronze piece with a quality of arrested motion, something mid-flight or mid-fall, not yet resolved. And she stood in front of it and felt the familiar response, the specific frequency of her own genuine taste engaging with a work of art, and understood that this, too, was still intact. She had been afraid, without fully admitting it, that coming back to the gallery would feel like entering a stage set, that the revealed architecture of her employment would make the work feel false. It didn't. The job was real. The work was real. What she'd built here in 8 months was real, regardless of how the opportunity had been made available. She could hold both things. The gratitude and the anger at the method, the real outcome and the violated choice. She was learning that complexity was not the same as unresolvable. "North wall," she said, still looking at the bronze. "Not centered, off to the left, about a third of the way in. The asymmetry needs room to breathe." Dara wrote it down. They had coffee in the back office, and Vivian told her, not everything, not the shape of Roman's empire or the full scope of what had happened in the Four Seasons suite, but enough. The years with Graham, the leaving, the 8 months, the mall. Dara listened without interrupting, which was perhaps the most extraordinary thing Dara had ever done in Vivian's experience of her. When Vivian finished, Dara was quiet for a moment. "The man who helped you," she said carefully, "Roman, is he—" She paused. "Are you—" "I don't know," Vivian said. "That's honest. It's the only honest answer I have right now." Dara nodded slowly, the nod of a person deciding that honest was enough and not pressing for more. Bumps. The divorce was finalized 11 weeks later. She had her own attorney, a woman named Janet Chu, recommended by the advocacy office on Commonwealth Avenue, precise and hard-edged and exactly what the situation required. The settlement was Vivian's terms, as Roman had demanded in the hotel room. Graham's attorneys made 2 attempts to renegotiate. Both attempts were declined with the specific brevity of people holding documentation they had not yet deployed but were entirely prepared to. Graham did not contest the final filing. She was in Janet Chu's office when the confirmation came through. A notification on Janet's computer, a brief exchange of paperwork, the administrative finality of a legal institution processing an ending. Janet turned the screen so she could see it. Dissolution granted. Vivian looked at the words on the screen. She waited to feel the release she had imagined, the specific expansion, the door opening, the light in the previously dark room. It didn't come that way. What came instead was smaller and more real, a faint, quiet unclenching somewhere deep in her chest, something that had been held tight for so long she had stopped being aware of the tension, like a sound you didn't know had been continuous until it stopped. "Congratulations," Janet said with the measured warmth of a professional who understood that this word was complicated in this context and used it anyway because there was no better one. "Thank you," Vivian said. She walked out of the building on Tremont Street and stood on the sidewalk in the January cold. 6 weeks past November, Boston fully into its winter, the cold with weight and permanence in it now rather than the early season sharpness. And she looked at the street. She called Roman. He answered on the second ring. "It's done," she said. A pause. "Good. Janet sends her professional regards." "She's good. You chose well." "I know." A pause. "Are you at the building?" "Yes." "I'm coming over," she said. "Not tonight. Tomorrow morning. I want to have a conversation." "Okay. A real one. About what this is and what it isn't, and what either of us actually wants. She paused. I'm not walking in with a decision made. I just want the conversation. Yes, he said. So do I. She put the phone in her pocket and stood on Tremont Street in the January cold and thought about all the things that were going to require rebuilding. Not just the practical things, the career, the financial independence, the slow reconstruction of a social world that Graham had systematically thinned over years. The internal things, the instincts that had been trained wrong, that would need patient retraining. The capacity for trust that had been used against her so thoroughly that she was going to have to learn, carefully and on her own timeline, how to distinguish between the real version and the weaponized one. None of it was going to be fast. None of it was going to be clean. But she was standing on a sidewalk in January, and the city was around her, indifferent and continuous and entirely her own. And Graham Ashford was in Hartford behind the walls of a legal proceeding that was going to occupy his next several years. And the air was cold enough to make her eyes water, and she breathed it in anyway. All of it. The cold and the exhaust and the river smell that reached even this far from the waterfront. She was alive. She was upright. She was still choosing. The next morning, she walked to Roman's building at 8 o'clock. The harbor was sharp and pale in the January light, the water the color of old pewter, the container ships moving in the distance with their slow, enormous patience. She took the elevator up and the door opened into the penthouse, and he was at the kitchen counter with coffee, the same way he had been the first morning she'd woken up here. He looked up. She crossed the room and poured herself coffee and stood at the counter across from him, and they looked at each other for a moment without speaking. Claire's sister, Vivian said. I went to Warwick. He was still. When? Last week. I drove down. She held her mug in both hands. Her name is Nora. She's 34. She works at a medical supplies company, and she has a dog and a small house, and she's been carrying what happened to Claire like, she paused, searching for the right word, like something she was never given permission to put down. Roman set his mug down. I told her that someone knew, Vivian said, that Claire wasn't invisible in it, that the people around her saw and were trying to build her a way out. She looked at the harbor. I didn't say your name. She didn't ask. She cried for a long time, and then she said she'd always wondered if Claire had known she wasn't alone in it, and I told her I thought she had. A pause. I don't know if that's true, but I believe it. Roman was quiet for a long moment. Thank you, he said. His voice had a quality she hadn't heard in it before. Not rough exactly, just less constructed, the controlled exterior at a lower setting than usual. I didn't do it for you, she said. Not harshly, just accurately. I know, he said. That's why I'm thanking you. She looked at him across the counter. In the January light, he looked like what he was, a man who had been making difficult decisions for a very long time and carrying the weight of some of them in ways that didn't show on the surface and showed everywhere underneath. She was not in love with him. She did not know yet if she was going to be. She was not even certain, standing here with her coffee and the harbor behind him, and the whole unfinished question of what this was between them, that love was the correct frame for it. What she knew was this. He had watched her survive something and had offered his resources to her survival without making those resources conditional. He had told her the truth when the truth diminished him. He had given her room and time and the specific rare courtesy of not pretending to know better than she did what she needed. He was also a man who ran an empire built in darkness and had made choices she would never fully know the cost of and carried a dead woman in Providence like a stone he would not put down. Both of those things were true. She was learning, slowly and with effort, that the people worth knowing were mostly made of exactly this kind of both. I'm going back to the gallery today, she said. Good. I'm going to look for a new apartment, somewhere I chose myself. Yes, he said. You should. And I want to have dinner with you this week, she said. Somewhere public, not as a strategy, just as... She paused. Just as two people having dinner. Something changed in his face, small but real. Thursday, he said. Thursday, she agreed. She finished her coffee and set the mug down and looked at the harbor one more time. The pale pewter water, the ships, the far shore. Boston in January, cold and certain and entirely indifferent to her personal history, which was exactly what she needed from a city right now. She picked up her bag. Roman. He looked up. The woman you are when you're trying to be better than what you've been, she said carefully. That's the one worth knowing. She paused. I think you know that. I think you've been working toward it for a long time. She held his gaze. Don't stop. He looked at her with those dark, level eyes for a moment. No, he said. I won't. She walked to the elevator. The doors opened and she stepped inside and turned around and looked at him one last time. Standing at his kitchen counter in the January light with the harbor behind him and the whole complicated, costly, unfinished truth of who he was exactly visible in the way he stood, the way he watched her, the way he didn't reach for anything to fill the space between them with noise. The doors closed. She rode down through the building and walked out into the Boston January, the cold hitting her face like a flat, open hand, and she walked toward Newbury Street with her hands in her pockets and her chin up and the city moving around her in its continuous, indifferent, entirely beautiful way. She had run from a monster and walked into a different kind of darkness and found, inside that darkness, not rescue. She had rescued herself in the end, in a hotel bathroom with a phone call and 40 years of accumulated knowledge of exactly who Graham Ashford was and exactly how to use that knowledge against him. What she had found in the darkness was something rarer, honesty without agenda, space without conditions. A man who looked at the worst version of his own history and did not flinch from it and did not ask her to pretend it was smaller than it was. That was not salvation. That was something better. That was the beginning of something that could actually hold weight. She turned onto Newbury Street and the gallery was half a block ahead. The small bronze plaque on the door, the winter window display that she had arranged herself 3 weeks ago and still liked when she looked at it. Dara's shadow visible through the glass, already moving, already in motion, already talking to someone or to herself, the two options roughly indistinguishable. Vivian pushed open the door. The warmth of the gallery wrapped around her. The specific warmth of a place she had built something real inside of, the smell of the space, the light on the art, the ordinary miraculous fact of a Tuesday morning in January and a job she chose, and a city that had held her while she rebuilt herself from the component pieces of what Graham had tried to disassemble. Dara looked up. You look better, she said. I feel better. Good. Dara handed her a coffee. The Callahan sold. Which offer? The higher one, obviously. Vivian smiled. She took the coffee and walked to the center of the gallery floor and looked at the north wall where the bronze sculpture stood in the space they had placed it. Off-center, asymmetrical, mid-motion, not yet resolved. She looked at it for a long moment. Not yet resolved. That was all right. Some of the most honest things were exactly that.